Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to those attending and also to viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor Bridges and I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas of change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. And for those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some quick house rules before we move on to our main agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one sounds, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile phones to be placed on silent or switched off. And we have feedback forms available at the back of the room and on YouTube underneath the broadcast. With that said, we move on to apologies for absence, please.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see none. Item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6. Are there any comments or questions? Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There are no Part 2 items. And as per the previous committee's decision, we will have presentations on 2 items this evening, which is item 5 and 6. And item 7, we will go straight to questions. We go on to item 5, which is the budget proposals for services within the remit of the Resident Services Select Committee. This evening we have Andy and Kerry. Good evening to you both, and whenever you're ready, please go with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the second finance appearance at the Select Committees for the new budget cycle, where I'll be presenting the detailed budget proposals within the remit of this committee for discussion and consideration. The feedback from this committee will then be included in the budget report, which will be presented to February Cabinet, where Cabinet will be asked to present the proposals to full Council. So I won't be running through the whole report this evening, but I will provide headlines in terms of the Council's in-year monitoring position and set out the context for the Council's approved budget strategy. So for 23-24, the Council are reporting an underspend of £2,000, with services within the remit of this committee forecast to overspend by £2.4 million, with this overspend being driven by three key themes. With these being green spaces savings that are being impacted by external factors such as inflation, community safety enforcement due to impacts at Heathrow and Brexit-related pressures, and finally, income pressures within the planning service. Within these services, there are £12.5 million of savings to be delivered in 23-24, with £242,000 of this continuing to be recorded as red, meaning there are concerns with delivery of these savings, with these relating to reduction in use of recycling bagged, reduction in the demand, and street cleansing, with a further £1,642,000 being recorded as amber 2, which means that progress has started on these savings, but there are some concerns for delivery within the financial year, with £839,000 of this sum relating to fees and charges income, and the remaining £803,000 relating to green spaces savings. Finally, there's £267,000 being recorded as amber 1, which means that this saving is progressing and is likely to be delivered in full, although some of it may slip into the next financial year, with this element also relating to savings within the green spaces service area. Moving on to the Council's budget strategy. In the consultation budget presented to December Cabinet, the Council's saving requirement to 28-29 was estimated to be £51 million, with a saving programme of £33.4 million being identified, leaving a residual gap of £17.6 million. The single largest factor in the strategy continues to be exceptional inflation, with this adding £48 million to the budget gap to 28-29. Within the remit of this committee, there are no exceptional inflation items, with a total requirement for this committee accounting for £6.5 million of that £48 million sum, with the pay award accounting for the majority of that at £5 million, with a further 1.5 million predominantly being related to contracts within resident services. Service pressures are forecast to add 24 million. This is predominantly from the impact of demographic growth in the borough, with the services within the remit of this committee accounting for 8.1 million of this figure. 5.1 of that is linked to waste services from the growing population, and a further 3% limited being driven by homelessness support demand. Finally, corporate items are adding 14 million to the saving requirement, with 7 million of this being related to the council's borrowing requirement to fund the capital programme, and 5 million related to TfL concessionary fares levy as a result of demand returning to pre-pandemic levels, with these two elements sitting outside of this committee. Following the work carried out during the autumn, the consultation budget presented a saving programme of 33.4 million, with 15.8 million of that landing in 24-25. Within this programme, 6.6 million fall within the remit of this committee, with 5.8 million of that being required in 24-25. The largest savings within the remit of this committee include 2.2 million against fees and charges, which is predominantly linked to yellow box junction charges, and the remainder being inflationary uplifts against fees and charges within this committee's remit. A further 1.5 million has been identified for maximising the use of Section 106 funding, with 0.6 million being required to realign the council's staffing budgets for the services within the remit of this committee, and then 1.5 million being linked to smaller items as set out in the report. Finally, moving on to the capital programme. The capital programme has been set at 218 million, or proposed at 218 million to 28-29, with 9 million of this sitting within the remit of this committee, the majority of which relates to the £7.5 million Chrysalis programme budget and £1 million for environmental and recreational initiatives. Finally, moving on to the housing revenue account, the housing revenue account set a capital programme budget of 442 million to invest in the housing stock, which includes increasing stock by 614 new dwellings, as well as maintaining the existing 10,000 plus stock that we have. The revenue side of the housing revenue account sets a balanced budget over the 5 years and maintains balances at £15 million over the medium term. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. I put it out for questions from members. Are there any, please? No? None from the Labour side? I thought so. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I've got... Just trying to make sure my page is here. The... Page 9... So we've got the overspend and the pressures that have been described. There's a lot to do with fees and charges that have not come in as predicted. I'm wondering what the consequences or what's been factored in for the current budget for the coming year. What your thoughts are with regards to that, and what sort of contingencies may have been put in place to compensate for anything where you think you're going to get this in, but actually it's not going to come in.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have included some rebasing in the budget build, so we've looked at what's coming in this year and tried to rebase it so that we can then look for new initiatives and any further savings or inflationary uplifts that can be applied, taking into account the shortfalls that are there.
Councillor Farley, do you wish to follow up?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, with regards to the current budget coming forward, just to understand that. The page... Sorry, page 19, Point 43. Again, back on the charges and so forth. The prediction is to generate further income of 1.8 million. Enforcement of yellow box junctions, which surprises me, we don't already do that. And I thought that, well, that whoever the authority was that is in charge of these cameras, and that it wasn't already being done in the borough. That surprised me somewhat. The environmental income from fines, and we're going to come on to that in one of the future the agenda points to come. Stronger use of CCTV. One of the aspects of that we've been told in previous committees is that, and I'd like to understand how this is going to work, because unless you can catch the person, identify who they are, you can't issue a fine. So I'm curious to know how that's going to work.
Councillor, thank you. What the proposal is to have an additional member of staff within the CCTV room. So I appreciate that sometimes you can't always pick out who the person is to generate that fine, to know who to obviously allocate the fine to. But once you can then pick up on spots where repeat offenders occur, and then if you start to recognise repeat patterns, then you can then start to look at how you then get that information to work out who the culprits are, if that's the right word, and then apply the fines to them. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Punja? I just want to use your microphone.
Just a couple of clarifications, please. Can I just ask what flat cash settlements are?
Certainly. So at the moment, central government have only confirmed local government financing up to the end of 24-25. So what we're assuming at the moment is that all government grant funding remains at the same cash level, so it's not inflated by CPI or any other kind of indices, which is pretty much what the whole local government sector are doing at the moment. We have put pressure on central government to give us indicative, at least a steer on what we think is going to come, but at the moment they're remaining tight-lipped on that.
Councillor Punja?
Thanks. So you're basically saying it's just with no inflationary kind of increases whatsoever? Yeah.
That's correct. And what we have seen in the past is that sometimes there are protected services that the government include within statements and policy statements. So what that means is that actually you end up with reductions in other areas in order to keep within those kind of real terms increases. So until we see the detail in that, it's better to be prudent.
Understood. And if I could ask one more, I just wanted to understand, on page 18 and page 19, there are two sets of figures in the savings proposals, and one is the 15 million that comes in, with 5.8 falling within this particular committee. And then if you go, that's on point 38, and if you go to point 44, it's a further, let's say, 900,000 on additional. So are we adding those figures up for this particular committee, this portfolio?
So these are, although they're, so we have, I appreciate it gets a bit confusing in some areas where we talk about cross-cutting savings, and we've got resident services specific cross-cutting. So these are cross-cutting within resident services. So it's just that because, for example, where you talk about discretionary spend, the elements are quite small in all of the various service areas. So that's the amount that we're going to save from the services within the Resident Services Select Committee across all of them. So it's just a very generic discretionary spend review that we've carried out.
I don't think you got my question. What I'm asking is, on top of that 5.8 that is in 38.38, are we adding this to that point 44's money to that? Because it basically feels like the 5.8 is not inclusive of that figure, is it? It's added on.
I understand your question. Apologies. So that is included in the 5.8.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by congratulating officers on delivering another excellent budget? I just wanted to talk a little bit around point 41 and some of the corporate sponsorship models. Would we consider making that part of a tendering process when we were putting out for those contracts again, whatever they may be? And what other opportunities have we looked at for corporate sponsorship, as I've seen that other councils of all political colours up and down the country take advantage of these opportunities?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I mean, in terms of a corporate sponsorship policy, that would go further in terms of bedding plants on roundabouts, that sort of thing. So it can go wider across the services. In terms of a full review, I believe that still is in process. Apologies, what was the first element of your question?
I think you basically answered it, but just what other opportunities have we looked at for the tendering process?
Yeah, so there's a wider review that's ongoing, so that sits outside of this remit as well. So, say, bedding plants, but further opportunities to bring that in so that it's one standard policy across the council.
Councillor Small, would you like a supplementary?
Yeah, Chair, apologies. Change of subject. What is the financial impact on the council? And I expect this is mainly going to be for vehicles within resident services, so that's why I'm asking it here, on the Mayor of London's ULEZ expansion.
Thank you, Councillor. So the ULEZ fees we're estimating will cost the council $240,000. So we built that into the budget proposals for 24-25, with that sitting within the finance portfolio. Although, as you say, it's the vehicles that are being used within the remit of this service, but it's funded through the finance side, which is why you're not seeing it in this paper here, but it is in the consultation budget presented to Cabinet in December.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your work on this budget. I was particularly pleased to see the ring-fenced HRA funds and making sure that we continue to solve damp and mould issues in our council properties, and also on top of that set aside a budget to improve the houses, like kitchens, etc. My question was, do we, and it's not mentioned in the report, which is why I'm asking, do we know the historical impact now of COVID-19 on the council's resources and finances, and how much is that still affecting us?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think in terms of the holistic council-wide impact from COVID, I think it's still ongoing. So I don't think we can actually give a final number because it is continuing. Kind of heard the term COVID scarring mentioned by the local authorities. It's kind of the impact that we're still seeing. So we have seen changes in behaviour which impact on things like parking income. We're also continuing to see high levels of demand within social care. But it's very hard to break down now where things like the cost of living crisis are impacting on demand versus COVID impact, and you can't really almost separate these things out into nice and neat kind of boxes, unfortunately. But up until the end of 21-22, all of the pandemic-related costs were funded by a government grant. We also set aside £10 million of our own local funds to fund COVID pressures. So at the moment, we haven't exceeded the funding that we set aside, including our local funds. But the council we are using those local funds in order to meet the cost of those pandemic costs. So at the moment, that £10 million set of reserves are due to be fully utilised by the end of 23-24. So any future costs will be factored into the council's budget strategy.
Any follow-up? No. Councillor Gardner.
I would like to thank you for this, but I don't understand a lot of it, so forgive me on that. A statement or something you said just now is that you get an extra officer in the CCTV unit to help with the fine supply tipping and things like that. Has it not crossed your mind that people know where the CCTV cameras are and they dump rubbish out of view? I mean, personally, I would prefer more CCTV cameras than just somebody sitting there, because most of the hotspots, the people have now moved to other hotspots and the cameras haven't. Just a thought.
Thank you, Councillor. And so when we put together the council's saving programmes, we work across the service areas, and we bring all the knowledge and information that we have, formulate these ideas. We don't just put an idea in because we like to take the money out, or so we like to think that everything that we put into the budget is founded on data and reason. So, but obviously we will then, throughout the budget monitoring next year, see how that gets delivered and how that progresses. And if we need to make changes to that approach, then obviously through that monitoring cycle, as if there's a risk against that saving, then we'll look at how we mitigate it and take it forward to ultimately deliver it. And if that means changing the approach, if we need more cameras, then that will be considered as part of the whole kind of financial piece, really. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to ask questions or comments? Okay. Andy, Kerry, thank you very much for your attendance. You'll note that on the report the committee is required to provide its comments. As we've done in previous years, I would suggest we can form the comments outside this meeting in consultation with the Labour lead. Unless anyone feels they wish to comment now, we can incorporate that as part of the comments outside the meeting. Agreed? Okay. Thank you very much. Our next item is item 6, the potential major review of homeless prevention and the customer journey. And we have this evening Melissa and Dan. Welcome to you both. Perhaps you can get the ball rolling by starting and introducing the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll say a few introductory words and then pass over to my colleague Melissa, who will set the scene in terms of the local context, in terms of housing advice and homelessness. But as members of this committee will recall, the committee considered whether to undertake a major review of the Council's housing advice and homelessness service at the end of last year. Subsequently, officers have met with the Chair and the opposition lead and with Democratic Services, and we've put together terms of reference which are set out in the paper before you for conducting the review, which includes, and I won't read everything out, but it's at the bottom of the first page of the report, which includes developing and gaining a thorough understanding of the Council's homeless prevention service and importantly the residents' journey through the process, scrutinising how effective our service response is locally in terms of meeting need, and also the service users or residents' feedback as part of that experience as well, and of course being open to looking at what other local authorities are doing to meet the rising demand and need for housing advice and homelessness, and obviously subject to the committee agreeing with terms of reference and then completing the review. That will then form a report with conclusions back to Cabinet, who make decisions on such recommendations. So at this point, pass over to Melissa, who will just pick out some headlines in terms of the national and local context, and then Chair, I'll hand back to you to lead the committee with any questions.
Thank you. So locally we have seen a 27% increase in approaches for housing advice and support over the last year, with the same amount of people approaching because of end of private rented tenancies, an increase of 27% there as well. This equates to about 100 households approaching us every single week on average for housing advice and support. And with the reduction in available private rented accommodation within Hillingdon and London that is affordable for households on lower income, we are seeing quite a struggle to find suitable accommodation in the private sector, and that is also seeing a considerable increase in the amount of incentives and financial benefits that we have to pay in order to be able to help house people. That in itself has seen an increase in the number of people we now have in temporary accommodation, which is up almost 500 from this time last year. And that is reflected across all of London as well as nationally. Yeah.
I think they're pretty much the headlines. Yeah. They're pretty much the headlines. I think it goes without saying, of course, that the challenges that Hillingdon is experiencing are not unique to Hillingdon. They are system and sort of regional wide, and the rising levels of homelessness are a function of the housing market and the challenges that are in the housing market. And obviously, our job as officers is to be agile in terms of developing responses to that. So we very much welcome the proposal for the review, and back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, just for members' information, that you're aware that we had this meeting with officers outside of this meeting formally. Myself and the Labour lead met with officers a number of weeks ago now, I believe. And it was mentioned at the last meeting our other concerns around damp and mould, and we come to the conclusion that we didn't want to make this review too broad, and actually the damp and mould issue specifically would be worthy of a minor review in addition to this. So we haven't forgotten about it. We will look at it in the near future, but we wanted to drill down on a bit more in regards to the residents' experience when they approach us for help. So thank you to the officers again for their input into this, and I invite any questions or comments from members. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of asking lots of questions, otherwise what's the point in having all these witness sessions and doing the review? But I just wanted to ensure that we are sort of asking third parties like charities to come in. The idea that people who are veterans that went to give the ultimate sacrifice for our country can be homeless, whilst it's terrible that anybody's homeless, it especially irks me when people from those types of groups are left behind. And I know there's some great work being done by lots of different third-party charities, organisations, and just to make sure that we get them in to see what more we can do to support the work they do, or potentially use them in our quest to make sure that nobody in Hillingdon is homeless.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood. Very good point, and this is the purpose of this agenda, is for us to tighten up on those areas that we're looking into, and I definitely think looking at our third-party engagement would be a very good place to start, specifically around charities and organisations such as the Citizens Advice Bureau, Shelter, other charities such as that. And indeed, if you have any suggestions that you may not think of in this meeting, please feel free to feed them back to Liz, and we can put that in as part of the review. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I noticed you said locally we have a 27% increase in homeless presentations. I was just wondering if you could comment on the impact of asylum seekers on that number, and especially asylum seekers who aren't able to then find accommodation.
Thank you. We do have a higher number of asylum seekers placed in the borough relative to others, which is obviously a Home Office sort of responsibility. We have seen an increase over the last year in presentations from former asylum seekers. A number are single persons and therefore not always entitled to or eligible for assistance from the local authority. They are eligible for and able to access financial assistance from the state to help them secure accommodation. It's the families who have a priority need, or in the presentations, applicants who have a priority need, including vulnerable single people as well. So our response for those that we're not able to assist because they're not eligible is to provide advice and guidance, and also refer on to other organisations who may have accommodation themselves.
Anything further?
Thank you for that. And I've got a second question around procurement. Obviously, that's by far the biggest issue, not having enough houses. And I just wanted to ask what's kind of being done about that, and what avenues are being explored at the moment, and is there anything we as a council or committee can do to help?
Thank you. It's a good question and very, very topical. Melissa and I, working with our finance colleagues, are doing a lot of work to go right back to basics and effectively present to the leader and his cabinet a proposed commissioning plan to increase the supply of affordable housing to either prevent or meet the need of homelessness. And there are various strands to that. So, for example, it's how can we increase the number of existing social rented properties that are available. So, in other words, can we make better use of our own stock? What increase in supply can we expect from our housing association partners? The private rented sector as well is important. So one of the things we do is to make accommodation affordable. Is that we, like many other councils do this, is pay the difference between the benefit rate and the market rate for accommodation and secure that on a 2-year tenancy. So that allows us to prevent homelessness because we've secured affordable accommodation for a set period of time. And we're also looking to increase the number of properties that are within the council housing stock as well by buying properties locally. So we're looking at all options in that regard as well. So we haven't quite finalised the financial details of that. That's been modelled actually this week, and we're hoping that that will be part of the budget plan for February.
Yes.
Just on that last point, when the next budget reports, etc., come through, is that something we can revisit as a committee?
Yeah, we can, if it comes to this committee, yeah. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. On page 31, you mentioned surveys, site visits or other fact-finding events. Is that something that is open to this committee, or is it just for yourselves?
That is for this committee, so
okay.
It's part of our review. That'll form part of the review process.
Can that be organised, or? Yeah.
We hope so, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just one more.
Yeah, of course.
When we had our meeting in October last year, we asked if a crib sheet could be organised for us regarding La Carta. We haven't received that yet.
Okay, I can follow that up urgently. I'll double check with the team and see where it's at and make sure we get that to you.
Councillor Gardner.
Question. Have you ever considered working with or organising housing cooperatives? You know why I said that.
Why have you asked that question, Councillor Gardner? I mean, in all honesty, we would want to consider all options, really. There are a number actually of charitable organisations in the borough who actually we make direct referrals to as well. So absolutely, we would want all options to increase supply to be considered.
Anything further?
Something that worries me on the legislative context, where you've got not to be intentionally homeless. I know what that's about, but a lot of residents don't. And I've had residents in the past. I think Melissa might have heard of somebody who left because they were frightened, and now they're regarded as intentionally homeless. I don't think a lot of people understand that if you leave a premises for lots of different reasons, not paying the rent and stuff like that, that we won't help you. So I wonder how we can get round that in terms of letting people know.
I mean, it is a challenge. I think Melissa and I have spoken about this a lot actually, and it's part of our sort of continuous improvement plan for housing. It is a technically complex area, and you're absolutely right that unintentionally residents sometimes can actually make their situation more vulnerable. So in that regard, we always encourage residents to seek independent advice, maybe talking to CAB or another organisation. But actually, we're also looking at a number of ways in which we can improve the information and advice, so that in a very supportive way, we're helping residents to understand the implications of certain actions or certain decisions as well on their longer term options that could compromise their situation. So I don't pretend we've got it perfect or right, and it is an area for further work. But I acknowledge that point you're making.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I'll say thank you to the Chair and to officers for arranging the meeting we had. I think this has promised to be a valuable exercise. I would like to ask if we can invite, because there's the consequence that the process that residents go through has on their own health, mental health, and the consequences of that then it has on the NHS and other taxpayer-funded areas. So I'd like to know if we can get social prescribers invited to attend, possibly GPs. I'm just thinking in terms of conversations I've had with people where they've been referred, and try and see if there's any way we can do that, and whether or not the mystery shopper, or if there is a mystery shopper scheme that is running, and to understand how that works, whether this is someone outside or we have someone internal that's doing it from elsewhere within the council, and to us, if that is working, how that's working, and to sort of get that understanding whether it is a good way or a bad way, or it can be, or improvements could be made to that. So yeah, if I could make those requests, thank you.
Yes, I think good suggestions, Councillor Farley. I think with GPs we just have to be careful not treading on other remits of other committees, but we can certainly get Liz to have a look at that outside and liaise with the officers to see if we can incorporate that in our terms of reference, perhaps, to look at those parties involved. I've got unless Councillor Farley wishes to add anything further. No, Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this review, and thank you so much for putting this together and doing this. I just wanted to ask, because I think we've had numerous conversations about various elements to this, and I believe that this review will be about getting a better service from us to residents, rather than other parts of this in terms of what it's hard to get housing stock and all of those things at the same time, but this is more about our service that we provide. And something that I've previously spoken about is a code of conduct that is in place, and also a housing charter. And I know that there are organisations out there from Shelter, not just Shelter, but actually other organisations that deal in the housing sector that actually create a housing charter for local councils to be able to work towards and use, and that housing charter enables residents and councils to be able to work in a similar vein, so everybody knows what stage they're at and where they're at, and how I suppose our services are delivered. And so in that space, I do wonder if that could be something that is, it doesn't have to come to a committee, but it just needs to be something that could be investigated and looked at, because I think that would benefit if the objective is in the conclusions to propose actions and give policy recommendations. And for me, that code of conduct and housing charter is a place to start to kind of go, what do we want to be, and therefore how do we get there? So I hope that would be incorporated. I totally agree with Councillor Smallwood on the servicemen and getting third sector charities, and would like to also look at potentially people like Trinity, who we would do a lot of work with, as they are a massive alliance with the council. But also in terms of our social housing, I'm currently having quite long conversations. I've created a social housing group in Useley, which is to do with Coin House, and because Coin House is in a terrible state, and it is L&Q housing that has come back to me on this and actually started talking to me about how they could improve that, because nobody should be living in the state that building is in, and it's horrendous. And we put residents in there, or it's a partnership. So I do think that we do need to be talking to those developers of social housing, and not just leaving it, because once they've developed it, it's the managing agents that are the issues. And I think in all of these issues it becomes about, there's so many that come about managing agents that don't look after the properties. And one final comment is just in terms of an experience that I've recently had, where we use lettings agencies to put our residents into spaces, and then they're not vetted, the properties are not vetted first. And so in this particular case, keys are handed over with electricity and gas, but the property doesn't have gas. Something's topped up and it's not the right thing that's topped up, it's not working. But there was no kind of I don't know, even a leaflet to say this is where everything is, or a show round of a property to, you know, when you rent a property you are told where things are or something, but you just have to go in there, and then there's nowhere for that person to go back and go, well, how do I claim my £30 of electricity? And for that person, £30 is whether they put food on the table that week or not. And they have to wait another 2 weeks before they've got the next set of money to be able to put heating in their home because they've just spent that on the wrong key. So I just think things like that are just efficiencies that could be taken in place with simple kind of talking to with the letting agencies. And I don't know if that's something we should be looking at too in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good points raised, Councillor Punja. And just to take the opportunity to remind members of the terms of reference on this potential review on page 27. Those are the terms of reference we're looking at for this particular review. So if you do wish to amend any of those or feel that there's something we should be adding on in addition to that, then please do use this opportunity to say so before we agree to adopt this as the review. Councillor Smallwood?
Well, Chair, that is almost like you were reading my mind. That leads nicely into one of my points. Just on point 4, whether that can include the GLA as well. That's not a party political point. That's just genuinely a practical one about how we work with City Hall on this stuff. I think that seems sensible. 2 other very quick points. I'm going to call them protected and vulnerable groups who may be more exposed to homelessness for a variety of social reasons, whether that be LGBT plus people and some of the social elements, the issues that they face, whether that be women and issues like domestic violence, how we support those groups, and maybe we could link that into one of the witness sessions if possible. And I think this leads on from Councillor Gardner's point. I'd also like to see us, and especially more power to our elbow as councillors around people who are facing struggles with La Carta and getting housing, thinking that our way around the system is to present homeless with their children, and think that somehow that might end up bumping them up banding, or it might place them at an advantage. And actually, we know, except in a few exceptional cases, that's probably not helpful. It takes away some of their historic, rights. So I just wondered on those 3 things: working with City Hall, the protected and vulnerable groups, but also making sure that if people aren't seeing it as an advantage to present as homeless, to try and achieve something else, which will have an unintended consequence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councillor Gardner.
One thing I've just thought about, because we've got so many people that have been placed out of borough, for argument's sake I'll say Slough because that's where a lot of the people are. Is there any way that we can talk to the schools? Because a lot of the schools are quite concerned that the children are still coming back. That although they're living in Slough, they're keeping the links to the borough, and the kids are staying at the schools. And the schools are actually quite worried, because while the mums it's predominantly the mothers, when they bring their children from argument's sake, from Slough to Hayes, they then wait all day to pick them up and to go back to Slough, because otherwise it costs them an arm and a leg, basically. So I don't know if we could speak to. Well, you must have a list of the schools that send in requests about the children.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Quite a few points raised. I would suggest maybe the officers liaise with Liz and shore up on some of those points raised and see which ones we can incorporate into what we've already got in front of us in the report. But I feel the consensus of the committee is that we adopt this as our review, and we're happy to go ahead with that. So if we're all in agreement, thank you. And we look forward to getting that started as of next meeting. Liz, is there anything you wish to say?
No, not really, Chairman. Just to point out that the next meeting is going to be on the 13th of February, and that will be to agree the scoping report. Yeah. And then obviously after that we'll be looking into the witness session. So I'll be liaising with Melissa. That
allows us some time to, as I say, show up on the other points raised.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. If there's nothing else, thank you, Dan, and to Melissa for your attendance. If you wish to leave, you're welcome to do so. Thank you. Item 7 is our ASBET update, pages 33 to 36. Joanne, thank you for your patience. There'll be no presentation on this item, but we will go straight to questions from members, if there are any, based on the report that we've received. I invite questions from members, if there are any. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for putting this together. I've got various things highlighted. On page 34, the website, so point 5, it refers to effective website content management will help the service. This afternoon I went on to the council website, because the report talks about how there's lots of things incorrectly classified. I didn't know where to go on the website. It ended up using the search field to find it because I didn't know where it was. So from the home page, you click on Safer Homes and Neighbourhoods, then to Antisocial Behaviour, and then on the left-hand side, you go down the list of various options, which then has fly tipping or rubbish dumping. I'm curious because this system, we kind of have it as the back office side of things as councillors. We got this in December, where we're now 24, December 22. When did just so I can understand, when did the residents get this, their side of things?
Thank you, Councillor. They've had this for some time before you had access to it. It was introduced in 2019-2020. The GOS system you're talking about, the reporting tool that's used. And then gradually different teams and services have been added to be able to use the service. And I understand that obviously councillors were involved in this from December 22.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. So, for context, to understand this, did your department have any input into how the website is designed and looks for residents to access it? Because you're talking about things that are incorrectly classified. That feedback must be going somewhere to say that, how are we helping the residents to correctly classify things? So I'm curious as to where your involvement is on that.
Certainly. As you know, we went through a restructure last year, and the former ASBET team was split into 3 separate teams, but every classification falls within the ASB subheadings on the GOS site. So what we've introduced is a business support system at the moment that's reviewing the web pages, that's reviewing the GOS site, and the actions and the format on the GOS website to make sure it's more clearer and that it's redirected to the correct team, because at the moment it's all the reports come into one place and then they're disseminated and directed to where they need to be, whether that's the Street Scene Enforcement team, whether that's the Environmental Protection Unit, or whether that's the ASB and Localities team. All those classifications of jobs fall under ASB. And that's where we are at it at the moment. Now, our business process and improvement team have been working with corporate comms, they've been working with the web pages, social media, and also working with GOS, the customer access team for GOS, the database system we use, to try and reorganise everything so that it's clear for residents to be able to access. That said, we've obviously had an increase in terms of residents accessing the system, but unfortunately things do get misdirected and we are having to redirect them internally, and what we would like is for that to stop at the front door so it's directed properly from the beginning, and that's not down to residents being misdirected, it's the fact they don't understand how the system works, I think, and that's what we're looking at the moment to review.
Any other questions? Councillor Punja?
Can I just follow up on that? Because I wonder if it's that they don't understand how the system works, or they don't understand the definitions of what things are. Because when you have to go through various subsections to get to where you want to, you've lost a user anyway, because if they can't see the icon and click on it straight away, they're going to go in a different direction. But I find that as a councillor as well, when I first started using this system, and we use it all the time, so a resident wouldn't be using this all the time as well, so they go into it 1 week and they might not use it for another 3-4 weeks, if that. And it was the fact that everything was hidden under each other and stuff, and so, you know, I was often calling waste collection fly tipping because I just didn't know where else to go for it and how else to put it down until you find the kind of right bits to put it under. So if I'm having those difficulties, then I can imagine that a resident would be having those difficulties as a user of this on a daily basis. So I think maybe it's about the definitions rather than the system in this case. And my other part of this was that if it is about the definitions, and if all of these things are being misdirected, and there's percentages in here, is the answer adding more people, or is the answer correcting that system, or is it both?
Councillor, I would say it's both. Yes, the system was devised without any input from the ASBET team as it was when it was brought in. And as you know, we've evolved now and we've changed and we've got 3 different teams. So rather than isolating it and doing it, say, just for my team, we're looking at doing it as a whole. Otherwise, you're going to get residents confused as to what goes where. But I appreciate the definitions are difficult for people to understand, but what we're introducing is a service and a team within our team that when things are misdirected, then we can pick them up very quickly and start redirecting them to where they needed to be. I think historically that the people, residents have not had a response, and they've not been told this isn't actually for this team, it needs to go here, and they've not had a meaningful reply. So we're starting to readdress those, and we've recognised that that's one of the issues for residents, so that we can try and anticipate both options, so that if they're not sure where it goes, we can actually point them in the right direction. If it does go to the right place, then we've got the time to investigate it and deal with it properly.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Punger has asked most of my questions, so I'm going to move on to what my second point was around comms when we actually do get, I was going to say convictions. It makes it sound like we're sort of, yeah, but convictions is convictions. How we are communicating that out to say to people, if you do this, you are potentially going to have a large fine, potentially spend 5 years in prison, blah, blah, blah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this is one of the things we're looking at the moment, because there's an increase in fines in place from the 1st of April. We're very aware that people need to be informed about what's going on, and what we've got, we're to fly tipping, which was part of the report, and we're looking at ways of better managing that and identifying hotspot areas earlier, as Councillor Gardner introduced when the financial team were talking, and CCTV operations and how we manage that. So we put out good results in terms of court prosecutions and numbers of fines. That goes out on corporate comms and social media. We have CCTV imagery where we can't identify the person, so we put that out for residents or anyone to come forward to say, yes, I know this person, or they're in this area, and then we identify the hotspot areas. So where we're getting repeated reports about the same people at the same location doing the same thing, it's about education, it's about us going out and doing operations, targeted days where we go and knock on doors and say, look, this can't happen, this is the result of what you're doing. If you continue to do this, then this is the enforcement route that we're going to go down. So it's a little mixture of everything at the moment.
Councillor Smallwood.
Sorry, Chair, I did have a follow-up until Jan said something around sending out to residents to identify people that are doing it. Now, I've seen that for serious crimes, but I can't, or the one I always think about is like when there's been trouble at the football and you sort of see people being sent out. I don't think I've ever seen, and I don't know whether other councillors have, anything around fly tipping in Hillingdon, and if so, could we get a guidance note out to councillors to show us where that is? And because I'm sure residents would be more than happy to help us, not to be grasses, but just to, generally. But I'd never heard of that, so it would be helpful if we could get maybe a note out to councillors on where that is, how we see it, etc., etc.
Certainly, it's a relatively new scheme that we've introduced to support ongoing with waste services and CCTV and things like that. So we're looking at all aspects of how we can start identifying offenders and obviously taking enforcement action.
If memory serves, it was actually a recommendation from a previous review on this committee that we actually tried to publicise CCTV footage where we legally could do. And I have seen a number of them on the council's Facebook page. Not many, but there have been a few which I've seen, and they're usually footage of maybe 4 or 5 incidents in one clip, and asking people to come forward. So I have seen them. Councillor Gardner?
Can I make a suggestion? Because I spend a lot of time reporting stuff, as you know. I wonder if you ask for a list of the HMOs in the borough, because I found that several areas where there are HMOs, mattresses appear, and I think it might be worthwhile maybe for the individuals who run the HMOs have sent some sort of communication to say, if you, I mean, we know what they do. When there's a turnover of tenants, they lob the mattresses out, but I just think that would be quite a good idea, so that they're being warned. That we know what they're up to, or what some of them might be up to.
No, absolutely, that's a huge problem. I had a meeting with Waste Services today to discuss the very thing. They asked if there was a mattress in a garden one day, and then the next day it was out on the street, whether there was any action we can take, and I've said yes, there is. It may be at base level, and we have to investigate from there to see if we've got sufficient evidence to then take enforcement action against the landlord or the homeowner. But we would certainly be looking at the managing agent or the landlord of the property rather than individuals, because you know they're a transient population anyway, they're in and out all the time. Yeah.
Anything further, Councillor Gardner? No. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Just initially, just following up on a couple of things. So, Councillor Smallwood mentioned comms. I've seen other local authorities publicise on the banners on lampposts and say, we've issued X amount of fines because it promotes, the council's doing something. Whether that's a possibility, I don't know. In the report, I'd like to know, and you mentioned it a moment ago, on page 34, what are we here? Point 11. The FPN may only be issued when an officer has reason to believe a person has committed a penalty offence and there is sufficient and appropriate evidence to a criminal standard of proof. Can you elaborate some more on what sufficient and appropriate evidence is, please?
It will be a collation of evidence, so it could be somebody that's seen the offence happen, that knows the person. There could be CCTV imagery. There could be documentation contained in waste. That will then give us an avenue to explore for investigation. And then it would be the investigator's responsibility within my team to collate all the information evidence together to put it up to our legal team to see if it satisfies the required standard. So the CCTV stuff is, as you've seen from the report, we had 555 pieces of CCTV evidence produced. Some of it was viable and some we've used to take enforcement action. Some of it was non-viable in the fact that we couldn't identify the person, and that's when we've started to work with corporate comms to get these images out. And the third thing is, where they're not identified but it's a repeat hotspot area, then we started targeted operations, working with the police, and we're looking at waste carrier operations as well on these vehicles that go around fly tipping commercially on council land and on private land, to be honest with you. But in terms of the evidence, it's got to satisfy beyond all reasonable doubt. It's a criminal offence at the end of the day, so we just need to collate everything that comes in, and then we will provide it to legal and see if those are satisfactory.
Councillor Parley?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just, from my point of view, the reason I'm asking this is because there was a bit of contradiction. So in my former ward, I witnessed someone fly tip. I was told that a penalty had been issued. Gave them details, description, and so on. Before Christmas, I witnessed someone fly tip. Same thing. was a different procedure because we had just emails and MEs, and now we have the system. But I gave the date, the time, to the minute, where the person dumped the rubbish, the property they went into. On that occasion, I was told a warning letter was going to be sent. So it's about, process councillors, as also for residents that are reporting, they're giving this information. There's sort of like a trust thing that actually, to what extent are they going to, lengths are they going to ensure that, their area, they don't want it looking like a mess, as it's stated in the report. But I'm just concerned that there's a possible discrepancy between treatment in, as a councillor, I did it in my former ward, done it in my current ward, and there's a different treatment going on.
Certainly, I can explain on that. In terms of the enforcement policy for Hillingdon, there's a stepped approach. So the suggestion is we advise and warn people first. Then, if there's non-compliance, we take the enforcement route. We might issue an enforcement notice, and then finally take enforcement action, whether that's a fine or prosecution at court. A lot of these residents, where we have identified, are quite vulnerable and either on low incomes, unaware of what the requirements are and their responsibilities in terms of storage and waste and those kind of things. And we would look to advise them on the first instance, saying this is your first and only warning. If this occurs again and we see this happening again, this is what the results will be, and this is the enforcement action we take. So we have to look at it as a whole, and we have to obviously bear in mind the enforcement policy that Hillingdon has introduced in terms of the stepped approach and apply it that way.
Any other questions? If I could just comment on the 52%, it just seems a very big chunk of waste of time from your department, having to chase your tail constantly on stuff that you'd be focusing on other things instead. And I just wanted to know, I assume the bulk of that is waste services, who can just pick up the rubbish from the public highway. And I just wonder, is it not the fact it's going to the wrong category? It's probably the wrong question we're asking to start with. In my view, it should be, is it on public land or private land? If it's on private land, straight to ASBIT. But part of me just said, if it's on public land, would it not be far better just to be automatically referred to waste services, in which they can determine, based on their level of expertise, is there sufficient evidence to have a prosecution? If so, we then refer it to ASBIT. But if not, we just clear it, which is ultimately what the reporter wants in the first instance. I know I certainly do when I've had it previously. And unfortunately, I've had cases where it has been referred to your department and it's been sat on, it's been taken 10 days to be addressed, when I know nothing's going to happen at all, and it's just going to be referred to waste services anyway, who do a fantastic job and will remove it within 24, 48 hours on average.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that was a problem with the process, that things were being misdirected. We identified that over 12 months ago with waste services, and the classifications now on the system are, as you say, public or private land. If it's public and there's no witnesses and there's no evidence to suggest who's responsible, it goes straight to street waste services for clearance. If waste services then find something within the waste that they think is viable evidence for us to act on, they will come back to us. So that's part of the process and the joint approach that we're introducing at the moment.
And how many referrals from waste services on average do you get that are actually genuine good referrals which you've got a lead on?
But probably between 5 and 10 a week from waste services, and then obviously we get the reports from the residents as well.
Thank you. I think that's everyone now. Yep, okay. Joanne, thank you for your attendance as always, and we'll note that report. Thank you very much for attending. Item 8. No, it's not noted because Liz wants to say something this evening. No. You thought you got away with it. Go on, Liz.
Yes, just briefly. So the forward plan that's in the pack was actually the January one, so it has been slightly updated since then. So I've just got a couple of updates for you. So just on page 41, the Cowley House item is now going to be coming to Cabinet in March. The next 3 items have now been approved. And then moving down to the bottom, item number 193, the private sector placement policy. and the shared ownership policy. These are cabinet member decisions. They're scheduled for February now. Also, the ASB policy is scheduled for February, hopefully. And then we have on the next page, page 42, housing allocation policy. That's now moved to April cabinet. And finally, there was one more change on page 44. The housing allocation policy there has moved from May to July cabinet. So that was just a brief update on that, just to bring you up to speed. Thank you.
And now you're happy to note, yep, thank you.
Thank you.
And our final one is the work programme. Just 1 point from me. On the April meeting, I would like to propose that the meeting is moved to the 16th of April due to my own availability. I'm hopeful that the committee are happy to endorse that. If not, even better. Where else would you want to be? Don't know. You're not that old, Janet. Are we happy to agree that as the change of date? Thank you very much. We do have some frontline visits lined up for this year. You'll be pleased to know, Liz, we had one so far for Botwell, was it? Or?
So we're looking to arrange the first site visit to the Botwell Leisure Centre, which is something that's been on our radar for a while to go and visit. I think the provisional date we're perhaps looking at is the 20th of February, the evening, but that's yet to be confirmed. So as soon as I have a date, we're going to try and make it 6 p.m, so hopefully it'll be easier for members to come along. Apparently they've got quite a lot there that they would like to show us. So, yeah. Thank you.
And as always, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to let us know, and we can try our best to fit those in for you. Any other comments? No. Councillor Sullivan, use your microphone, please.
You were going to mention the ride-along.
No?
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 Sorry, I thought you were.
Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance, everyone. That concludes our business for this evening, and I declare the meeting closed.